Welcome to the Heidi Thorne Show. I'm your host, Heidi Thorne, and in this podcast, I share my real-world self-publishing and small business experience with you. So let's get started with today's show. A question came up in a writer forum about using photos in self-published books. So what do you need to know? Let's get this out of the way right away. If you're using photos in your self-published books, you need to get permission to use those photos. If you take your own photos, that's a different story. But even that has some issues. First of all, let's talk about copyrights. In general, the person who clicks the shutter on the camera, or these days with our smartphones, it's the button, they're the ones who own the copyright to the photo. So that's just a general rule of thumb. Another question came up. What about old photographs from years and years and years ago? Or images such as old postcards? Well, that's a good question. Copyright law is one of the most complex out there. There is a circular that the Copyright Office has published. I will include a link to that in the show notes so that you can check it out. But in general, works that were created after January 1st, 1978, the copyright endures for the life of the creator plus 70 years. That's a long time. It changes if there's multiple authors, then it's the last surviving author and 70 years. And then there are special rules which extend that period for anonymous works, works for hire, works done under a pseudonym. So it's very complex. So the rule of thumb that I always go by is everything is copyrighted, and that you'll have to get permission to use it. Why? Because your self-published book, even if you don't make a lot of money, is a commercial venture. You do that to sell books. And anytime you have a selling situation, somebody wants a slice of the pie. So just consider that all images and photos are copyrighted and always seek permission. Now, what about photos you take yourself? Well, you're the one who's clicking the shutter, right? So those should be okay, except if the subject of the photo has some rights you need to observe. That's often considered rights of publicity or privacy rights. So you can't just go randomly taking a picture of a person and then slapping it in your book and making money off of your book. That person may want a slice of your royalties or revenues. And don't consider that a place or something that's public or open to the public is automatically okay for you to take pictures of it and include it in your book. Here's an example. The National Park Service here in the United States. If you take photos in the national parks to be used commercially, such as a lot of photographers love the beauty of nature, and so they sell their photographs. Or you, as an author and publisher, you include pictures of the national parks in your books. You have to get permission from the National Park Service. This all gets very messy, doesn't it? Another problem that I see with authors is their headshot, book cover photo, profile photo. a lot of them look at the pictures that were taken at some special event in their life, such as a wedding or graduation. And so they use that one as their book cover photo. Do you know that that is improper to do that? And the photographer who took that special event photo could ask you for royalties or damages. Now, a lot of photographers do headshot, profile, PR photo work, and that's pretty much understood that when you go to a photographer and you say, hey, I am wanting you to take a headshot of me for use in my business or publishing or whatever, they're pretty well aware that you're going to be using that photo everywhere. But just in case, you want to be clear with your photographer that you are going to be using those photos in a lot of places. You're going to be using it on social media. You're going to be using it in your books. You're going to be using it in your PR. So just make sure it's clarified with your photographer. So how about stock photography? This would be more the decorative type of pictures that you would use in a book. I believe I've ranted on this before, but the free stock photo sites online are extremely scary to me. I would not use any of those photos in my self-published books at all because the rights are so unclear about who owns them, and a lot of them don't have oversight, so they just let anybody upload anything, and you don't know the provenance of the images. So you don't know who owns it. If you tried to get permission, you probably wouldn't be able to. That's why I use legitimate stock photography sites. I have used iStock Photo for many, many years. And the one reason I use them, they have a lot of great imagery, of course. But the main reason I use them is because they are extremely clear about what you can and cannot do with the content on their site. So look for that when you are looking for a stock photography vendor. Related to online images, just presume that anything that you find online is copyrighted and not available for your self-published books. Let's just get that out of the way. If you found it online, it's not yours, period. You also need pretty high resolution photos. So people who swipe images off the internet generally have pretty low resolution photos, which don't print well at all. So you have to have some pretty good quality photos. Then the question came up about, what about eBooks? What do you do with eBooks? Can you have pictures in them? Well, sure, you can. The formatting for photos in eBooks is tricky. You can't do what's called wrap text, where you have a picture and then the text wraps around it. You can't do that in an ebook. Generally, you have to put the image on a separate paragraph so that it doesn't mess up the text. The reason this happens is because with e-reader devices or apps, the book content is constantly being resized to fit the device that it's being viewed on. This is called responsive design. So even if you do, though, put those images or photos on a separate line, it does create kind of a choppy reading experience. So be very careful with how many photos you use. And here's another reason why you want to limit the photos that you use in your ebooks. On Kindle Direct Publishing, at the 70% royalty level only, this does not apply to that 35% royalty level, only the 70% royalty level. They charge you, the author, a file size fee, which is deducted from your royalties. So the bigger your book file, your ebook file, and if it has a lot of photos in it, it's going to be a big ebook file, the lower your royalty. So keep that in mind. It'll cost you. But I think we have to really look at, do you need photos in your self-published books? I'm going to say that most books don't need them, but here are a couple of special issues regarding that. Even if you're using great stock photography, it's legit and it deals with your material, some of it may become dated very quickly. And nowhere did this become more evident as just recently with the coronavirus pandemic. So a lot of business books, what do they show? People shaking hands? Now that's not a thing. And probably will never be a thing again. The other one is technology. Now this is where I see it happen most often with some of the authors that I work with, and they're talking about business, of course, and sometimes technology subjects. So they'll put pictures in of people using a computer. Well, depending on how old that picture is, it could make your book laughable. I wrote for a blog that was a tech kind of blog for a number of years, several years ago. And they wanted us to use a particular stock photography site that they had cleared, which is great. That's fine. I'm glad that they set that parameter. Unfortunately, the stock photography site only had old photos of technology. Those big boxy computers on people's desks. The cell phones and the mobile phones were like Blackberries, early Blackberry devices, or flip phones. It was hilarious. So that can make everything look dated really quickly. So be careful with the stock photography. And do you really need it? Seriously. What I've had to tell some of these authors, especially those who use a ton of this kind of stuff in their book, I said, you know, people know probably since the 1980s what a person at a computer looks like. So don't date your work and make it seem old and out of date by using the wrong kind of photos. The question that was in the writers' forum that started this whole discussion was more related to fiction. When it comes to fiction, using pictures in the book is ridiculous for adult fiction. Generally, children over the age of maybe 10, 12 or so, they don't need pictures in their books. They can create mental pictures in their head while they're reading the story. And in fact, that's part of the joy of reading, is that you're creating these mental pictures in your head. So don't deny your readers the joy of reading and creating in their imagination by slapping a stupid photo in your book. And take a tip from the big guys. Now, here's the test. I want you to grab some of the most popular books currently that are on the bestseller lists, fiction or nonfiction, novels, and I want you to scroll through the pages. If it's ebook, of course, you'd be scrolling, or if it's a physical book, just flip through. And I want you to see how many of them have photos or other pictures in them. I'm going to say no. For some topics, such as history or educational, informational type books, sometimes photos are absolutely necessary in order to explain the topic. So that's when photos are useful. But if it's just for decorative purposes, it's a big no for me. So I hope you have found that helpful as you start planning for your self-published books. And if you did find it helpful, I would appreciate it if you would go over to Apple Podcasts and give the Heidi Thorne Show a nice rating and review. And while you're there, of course, subscribe to the Heidi Thorne Show so you don't miss an episode. I'm also on Stitcher, Podbean, Spotify, Google Podcast. So wherever you like to listen to podcasts, I probably am there. So please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. If you like the video version better or like to listen on YouTube, that's okay. You just subscribe to my Heidi Thorne YouTube channel and turn on the notifications so that you get an alert when a new video is available. Please share the podcast or the video with your friends on social media. My self-published books are on Amazon, Audible, and Apple Books. All you have to do is search for my Heidi Thorne author page on any of those platforms and you'll see a list of books that's available there. If you'd like to connect with me, my website is very simply HeidiThorne.com. Thank you so much for listening and for your support. I'll look forward to talking with you again in the next episode, and in the meantime, have a great day.